Welcome back to the Comfy Chairs, a podcast from 123 Limited about leading and learning. I'm Kate, and today's conversation is about a surprisingly controversial statement. I have a best friend at work. Since Gallup first introduced this item as part of their Q12 employee engagement survey, it has raised more than a few eyebrows, and it still does. But the data have consistently shown that work friendships play a part in nearly every aspect of company performance. For example, positive responses to the best friend at work question correlate to better scores in retention, satisfaction, and likelihood to recommend as a place to work. Moreover, the companies that are top performing in these measures and other key performance indicators like market share, customer satisfaction, and even profitability don't leave this aspect of the employee experience to chance. They understand that leaders have a significant role in making it come to life. So, why do so many people still dismiss this survey question and the conditions it measures? Today's guest in the Comfy Chairs joins me for a conversation where we hope to uncover some answers. She is, I think, just the right person for this topic. Not only does she have extensive leadership experience and a reputation for creating lasting and successful working relationships, she's also my best friend, and we met at work. Amy, welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Yes, and this is actually a re-recording because we had some technical difficulties, so that is definitely the mark of a good friend.
Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I'd like to invite you to start with introducing yourself.
Sure. So I'm a nurse. I'm a healthcare leader. I've been an executive and a leader in the healthcare world for over 20 years now. A variety of different settings, different team sizes, different makeups of my team, some remote, some all on site, some 24/7. So just a variety of different teams I've worked with.
In preparation for today, I had sent you a couple of articles, some of them directly from Gallup. They call out 4 or 5 benefits that I thought would be good for us to kind of start with and react to.
Okay.
They show that when people claim a best friend at work, belonging, psychological safety, accountability, ownership, and positive impact to culture all come into play. So I'm curious, this is a real broad question on what your thoughts are in response to those articles, and if you think there's anything really important to call out.
So I think it's interesting to actually see the results and the outcomes correlated like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
When we first started at my organization asking this question, I was kind of like, well, this is kind of silly. What does this have to do with the engagement?
Yeah.
But when you step back and really think about it and read those articles and you think about how all those pieces tie together to an employee's engagement in the organization, it really does make sense. So psychological safety stands out for me as a big one, right? In healthcare especially, but in any industry. And really having that person at work that you can go to and not be worried about what they're going to think.
Yeah.
Whether it's hey, I don't even know what to do in this situation, or something as simple as, hey, remind me when this project's due because I don't want to ask my boss and I'm pretty sure I'm late, right?
Yeah.
But those kinds of things, I think having that is important, having that person you can go to and feel safe to ask the questions and never feel like you're going to be slighted. The other things that are really helpful or important is about just the teamwork, the teamwork that comes from those relationships.
Let's talk about, there is a distinction. You and I've spoken about this before, not just during our first recording attempt, but in life, that it can be a little dicey to talk about friendship because for some people, they then hop right over the fence to talking about work being like family. And the research isn't, I have a family at work. It's, I have a best friend at work. And I won't hide this. I do not like it when people say work is family. I think that's not the right type of boundary to have in place. I know many people get that, and I'm trying not to be judgmental, but there is a distinction there. And I think a little bit of what you were stumbling over was that, is it that close familial, or is it that relationship that has a healthy give and take.
Yeah, you're correct. I think that relationship with the healthy give and take is what's important, right?
Yeah.
I agree with you on the family piece. I think it's easy sometimes for us to say that we're at work a whole lot of hours in a day, most of us, and so it is easy to feel that way. But what you rely on your work best friend for is very different than what you rely on your outside support person for, typically.
Yeah.
And everybody's different, but typically there's a boundary there. And I think it's important for people to be able to distinguish and understand, what I go to this person at work for. And there's lots of times you have great friends at work. You may never see them outside of work.
Exactly.
Hey, I'm working with so-and-so and so-and-so today. It's going to be a great shift because we're going to have a little fun, but we've got each other's back, all the things that are important and making the day go well. And then, we're going to all go home and do our thing and come back tomorrow. And that's just how it is. And so just having that separation.
Yeah. I think that's a very important distinction. It comes down to boundary management. And as important as psychological safety and belonging are, that those clean boundaries kind of help maintain it. Particularly in the environments that we're familiar with that are high stakes, sometimes very high emotion, can be literally life or death. That the friendship's important, but the clean margins, if you will, are something that I would always advocate for. You've used the term have your back a couple of times, and that's something that we've seen in some of the literature articles that we've read, but I'd like us to talk about what exactly that looks like and some of the other aspects of what makes friends at work.
So in my mind, that have your back kind of thing is that person that that you can go to, right? Or they may even be the one that, let's say you've been in a difficult meeting and you stumbled or you weren't sure or you got put on the spot. That's the person you go to say, what could I have done different? What did you see that maybe wasn't good, or what did I miss, kind of a conversation, and using that person as really that helped me. And I think it's that person that, regardless of the situation, is going to be there to support you. And usually vice versa, right? It's a give and take relationship. So that's kind of where that comes to in my mind.
Yeah. I think about having people at work who safeguard your reputation as well. I know one of the terms that sometimes people use is brand. But are they there if you're not in a meeting and something comes up? Do they have your back? Are they going to talk about your good work? Are they going to sing your praises? And not with any idea of gain for themselves.
No, I think that's a great example. Yeah.
Now, what do you think the secret is? How do we go about building and maintaining those workplace friendships?
I think as an employee, as the looking for the peer and the friend, I think it's just about making the connection. You make the connection with the people that you work with, maybe not all the time, but routinely enough. You make the connection with people that are going to support you in your growth. I think as you get into a leadership role, you're looking for someone that's not always going to be like, oh yeah, you're right, they're wrong. You want somebody that's going to support you, but also help you think broader. And I think it's important to have those things in mind. I think it just becomes about how you spend the time to get to know someone and the relationship. And it kind of goes from there.
Yeah. As you've gone from, staff to leader to executive in your own career, have there been any differences in how you manage those relationships over time?
I would say definitely. And so is that about the role? Is that about experience and wisdom that comes with years? One of the two, right? Probably a little of both. I think if I think back to early in my career, it was a very different friendship. The boundaries were not the same.
Yeah.
You were friends. You went out after work. There was just a different relationship there. As I stepped into leadership roles, that looked different. It had to, in many ways. And And so figuring out what that looks like. But I think even through my leadership journey to where I am today, it's been very much about a shift from, for me at least, looking for the friend who was always on my side and never would say, no, I think you missed that one, to now it's that person that I know is going to help me grow in the right ways. Yeah. Always be supportive, but isn't going to always be like, oh yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
Kind of a person.
Yeah. I think it's good that we're talking about leaders, because where I eventually want the conversation today to go is the role and responsibility of leaders in fostering friendships among their team. But a big part of leading well in this space is recognizing that you are an employee. You should have friendships at work to make your experience better, to improve your engagement and productivity, but also recognizing that if you have aspirations to move up the chain of command in a traditional promotional way, that it's going to have an impact on those friendships. That the friends that you had when you were in the front line, those may still be precious relationships, but they may not look the same. And the burden is unfortunately on you as the leader.
Absolutely.
For that.
Yeah.
I also think about some of my very early career missteps in that space. And I'm going to say fortunate, when I was entering one of my very first managerial roles, that I had two coworkers, that I was friends with. I would have said, if I'd taken the survey at that time, they would have both come to mind on that question. And when I became their manager, the one woman, she was very emotionally mature, and she and I were able to have that conversation about, what does this mean for our friendship here at work? Now that I'm your boss and I have responsibility and accountability for your performance, we navigated it well. This other woman, it became a very unhealthy dynamic. And I go back to that issue of boundaries, that I was too inexperienced and naive, and it totally blew up in my face. Totally blew up. It impacted my ability to be effective with her, with other members of the team. And I'm not saying I'm responsible for her poor performance at that point. There was a lot else going on. But, I did have a part to play in her not being an effective, lasting employee because of that.
Yeah.
Hard lesson to learn, but I'm very glad it happened in my 20s and not as I'm approaching 50.
Correct. Yeah.
So,
and we probably all have a very similar story, right? Of learning those lessons, sometimes the hard way. And even as much as you're given that tidbit and that, that kind of pearl, if you will, of leadership as you're getting going, I think it's something that many of us have had to really figure out how we work through and figure out how to draw the boundary. And
well, in any of those lessons, it's, what did I learn?
Yep.
Okay, I made a mistake. What did I learn?
Absolutely.
How do I use it going forward? And that space of work relationships is really important to get figured out sooner rather than later, I think. So, we've talked a little bit about, there's research supporting it. We're both very pro friendship at work. Why do you think that this is something that people resist, that leaders specifically resist?
I think there's probably a couple things that come to mind. I think one is always the concern of productivity. If people are too friendly, is the work getting done, or is there more time spent getting coffee and chatting about last night, right? Or whatever. So I think that productivity concern is real for a lot of folks. I think another one is a little bit about not truly understanding the impact that it has on your team. And so maybe linked to productivity, but you just want people to come in, do their job, and go home. And that's not realistic, right? We all know that if all the engagement signs point to the results.
Yeah.
And the other thing that sometimes I think, and maybe having come from healthcare, large units, large groups of people, you sometimes see cliques form if you're not careful, and we go back to boundaries, but that can have a detrimental impact on your outcomes. And so if a leader's been through situations like that, there's probably fear.
Yeah.
And I think fear of what it does to my unit or my department, but also fear of what's happening with those folks, especially if I'm not comfortable myself in my role. How much, like, you just kind of a little distrust of what's happening with that tight group of people.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that this point has come up again, because when you first mentioned that during the take that shall not be named, I was a little embarrassed to say I hadn't even thought about that fear of the team against me that some leaders might have. I was like, oh, well, yeah, that is the case. And I think when we talk about concerns about productivity or clicks or fill in the blank, some of it has to do, those leaders lack a certain amount of savvy, understanding, like, productivity is not 8 hours nose to the grindstone.
Correct.
Human beings can't maintain that. Healthy breaks are part of our productivity. That relationships help make those breaks healthy.
Yep.
That clicks aren't necessarily evil by their very nature. And if you're concerned about your employees, quote unquote, plotting against you, that's a huge red flag. So I'm curious, what part, as a leader of leaders, somebody who manages leaders yourself, what role does the manager's attitude toward their employees having friendships play in your assessment of their leadership abilities?
I think that's a good question. And I think it's like so many things when you're assessing one of your leaders, it's a piece of the entire picture, right?
100%. Yeah.
But I think it's a symptom. And I think it's something that you can really look at to say, if you're seeing things in the department, the outcomes aren't what you expect. We're not hitting targets. The engagements, the overall engagement scores are low. There's a high turnover rate. You start to piece all that together and really understand, what's at play here. And I think it has to be part of the conversation or part of the digging to understand. It's never, in my mind, there's never typically one thing that's the problem.
Yeah.
There's usually a lot. And this is one piece of that bigger problem.
Yeah. I think it's a thread that you can tug on. And because it is a divisive concept, unfortunately, depending on how vocal someone is, it may be a little sign to you as the manager, the leader of the leader, to say, let me pull on that and see if it connects to anything else.
Right.
Which, is any manager's job, regardless of level, is to have that awareness of their people and their attitudes. So it all ties in. Let's dive a little bit more into how leaders can support friendships at work for their team.
So I think there's a couple things, and I think one of the things I'll tell you a little story, kind of to get us started. I have a team that is currently remote. They were not. They worked together in the same area pre-COVID. Everything's either pre-COVID or post-COVID, right? But pre-COVID. So they were quickly pushed out to be a remote team, fully remote. And we've kept them that way. And actually, they enjoy it. It's working well. I was with them at a holiday luncheon, a year or two ago, and I overheard a conversation, and one of the employees walked up to Tim and said, "Are you Tim? We've never met. I'm Susie." And he's like, "Oh, yeah." And she said, "I have to tell you how much I love your daily message and our Teams chat. Come to find out, Tim every morning put in either a joke or a fact of the day or something for the team." And
how fun is that?
Right. And so just that, I've never met you in person, but you impact me every day. It was kind of cool to hear, right? And to step back then and actually talk to that leader later to say, tell me more about what you've done to foster this. What is this like? And And she shared, we struggled. This team really struggled when we were split apart. And so we've created some intentional, we have a Teams channel that's for that. It's for the just connect. Sometimes it's about I don't know what to do in this situation question, but it's the whole team. And so whoever can weigh in. And she said, and I let them, the jokes, the comments, happy birthdays, that's part of what it's about. So it was really like, gosh, that seems so simple, but it really does pull a team together in a way that's different and allows them to know a little personal something about one another when they may not know what one another looks like. Right.
Right.
So I think those things are important. I think when you think about teams that are together more often, it's not, I don't think it's big things. It's letting the camaraderie happen organically. I think you have a 10 a.m. staff meeting, people are chattering and life is good. They're talking about good things. Let them talk till 10:05. It's okay.
Yeah.
Or, use time on an agenda to introduce people to share stories with one another. That just helps people connect in a different way.
Yeah. I think one of the things I love about that, Amy, is that it's easy. It's simple. It's not, here's a whole program about how you're going to have your employees have fun with each other.
And then I need you to document it and have your action plan and all the things. That's not right. This isn't that.
No.
Right.
What I love about it is it's within the flow of work and it's allowing for those natural interactions. And all it takes on your part, leader, to do that is to say, I need to create a 5-minute cushion in my agenda. And when it's time to transition from what I think of as kind of the fellowship to the business part, to do that with kindness.
Absolutely.
Now, you and I we're not the party planning people. No. Probably one of the reasons we're friends. And there are people that's what they crave, even from their work friendship, is to have that more social as opposed to, I'll call it incidental, where it just kind of happens organically throughout the day. What can managers do to feed a little bit of that to their people as well, if they're like us and they don't want the party, they don't need the party?
So I think it's a little bit about, well, as always, knowing your team, right? So you've got some folks on your team that's important too. Or maybe it's just important, once, twice a year to have something outside of work. But I think it's finding the people on your team that like it and that are asking for it and empowering them to go for it. Go ahead and plan. Let's plan a after work outing, or a Christmas luncheon or whatever it might be. It could even be as simple as a carry-in for,
right,
next month's birthdays, whatever. But let them plan it. Give them the space to do it. Your team. If you have to give a few guardrails, that's fine. But let them go with it.
Yeah. Well, and that's one of those leadership hacks, if you will, is sometimes you can have things happen on your team because you let other people do it.
Yeah.
Particularly if you're not inclined to do the more, potluck fun stuff, or if you don't have the time.
Right.
But it's a way to recognize and to let those employees make it happen for themselves and for their colleagues. Yeah, that one. We had also talked about in the past about introductions. You mentioned that as something to do like during a staff meeting. But I also think there's real value in how we onboard people into teams.
Yeah.
And I'd like to know, what are some things you've seen that have worked? And if there have been any things that you're like, I would do that differently.
Yeah, it's always a challenge. Not always a challenge, but there are challenges with that and finding the right mix of what that looks like. And, I think the first big thing is just making sure that people are brought into the team. You can't just drop somebody new in a department and be like, good luck, and walk away, right? Or even this is so-and-so and she's going to show you the way today, and then you're on your own. So I think it's about connecting people. And, we talked last time about kind of buddy programs and the like, and they sometimes work, they sometimes don't. It all depends. But I think it's about helping find the people to help the newer person find their way.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that I expect you to be connected and best of friends, but you at least have a go-to when it's gosh, help me, where do I document this? Or, how do I get to the cafeteria again? Because, some of our
Yes.
sites are huge,
Or-
you get into these.
Never mind the cafeteria. Where's the nearest bathroom?
Right, exactly. And I think you have to be somewhat intentional because people get busy and they're just about their day and they're working to get their work and their tasks done. And I don't think it's intentional, but I think that they would leave that person out. But being very purposeful about, let me introduce you to these folks that you're going to be working with. They've been here for a long time. They can help guide you. It related. I recently joined a new gym, and it's a very it's a boot camp gym. There's a process, to everything they do. And I'm there 6 o'clock one morning, my first time. So first you're still asleep, right? But they were very intentional. And I'll never forget, the coach looked around the room and he's like, come over here with me. This is Mary and Mary, and they're going to help you out. And so to this day, I still hang out with Mary and Mary because they're familiar. We chit chat, and
you only have to remember one name.
Correct. It's much easier at 6 a.m. But it's the same thing. It's not, again, it's back to simple. And I think it's that how you introduce people to the team. And then, if you have a remote team, how do I go about that? We've started using a lot of pictures
I love that.
in announcements, even about, so-and-so's joining the team or has been promoted, and putting pictures in so people can connect a face and a name and start to just feel different about it.
Yeah. Something I've seen done that I love is not doing a formal picture, asking them to share their favorite picture of themselves or their family.
Right. Yeah.
And those pictures have been such beautiful windows into who those people really are.
Mm-hmm.
Even not having your blurred background on.
Right.
If you work from home, and there are reasons to do it. I don't ever fault someone for being like, I didn't get to the laundry and I'm just going to blur that today. Something I loved about the time that I spent remotely during the pandemic was that window into people's homes. To be able to imagine them in their place. Because you don't always get to make your office your own.
Yeah. It's funny you say that because I have recently, as you know, I'm quite mobile. I am not what I would call remote, but I'm never in the same place. And so I have recently, probably back around Christmas, shifted to some backgrounds. More about it was more about Christmassy at that time, right? But then I shifted to a winter one. Recently shifted to a spring one after some pressure that winter was over. But it's interesting you say that because I look for those pictures that are kind of calming to me or speak to me. And so there's a lot of conversation about what's that today, and so it does lead to a little different conversation than whatever randomness is behind me. But I hadn't really thought of it that way.
It's important for us to talk about the needs that remote workforces have. What are some of those simple, tiny ways that you can encourage conversation that isn't always focused on the job? And it can be something as little as having a picture up from your last vacation. It's the tiny little moments of intention that I think really make the difference. And that's the leadership skill and making the small choices that are about human connection. I want to go back to the buddy program because I feel like I have an apology to make to the universe, if you will, because I have in the past been very vocal an anti-buddy program. I think some of it is I don't like the language and I'm picky about word choices. I also think some of the buddy programs that I've personally encountered through research or personal experience have not done a lot to treat people like professionals. There's been this kind of elementary school buddy activity going on, and that always leaves a bad taste in my mouth. All of that being said, my judgment aside, I think that is a very simple and powerful way to recognize people that create fabric on your team and to ensure that somebody who is new immediately starts building relationships. Yeah, I've come to really rethink that.
Yeah, and sometimes it's in the terminology, right? But I also think if I think back, being in healthcare, there are often people on your team that are they're the culture you want everyone to learn. They may not quite have the skill set to train the new employee, but they have the culture and they have the behavior and the attitudes. And so how you highlight and encourage that as well.
Yeah. Well, it's, if we think about organizational culture, what does that mean? And lots of ways to define it. But I think the simple one for our purposes today are the behaviors and mindsets that we all contribute. This is the way we do things. And you want to have a warm, welcoming environment that is integral to your team culture, your organizational culture? Or do you want it to be a little more survival of the fittest?
Right.
Not to be too flippant there, but I think that's the distinction. I had the opportunity to have as a guest in the podcast Stephanie Lemick, who's an expert in trauma-informed workplaces. And if I think about a first day experience where you're thrown into the deep end, even though it's not necessarily big trauma, are you creating the associations and minimizing negative impact to people? Being able to make it as hospitable and friendly as possible can go a really long way.
Absolutely. I think it sets the stage. It sets the tone, to your point, of what to expect when I come to work every day.
Yeah.
And I think we have to remember that in any organization, any move an employee makes is impactful. So I may be an intercompany transfer, but this is still all new to me.
Yeah.
Your policies are different. The people are different. All the things are different. So you have to treat every employee like the same as they come in. But absolutely setting the tone right from, I would argue, from before day one.
Yes.
And.
Yeah. So you mentioned like an intercompany transfer. We've talked about promotion as well. I think workplace friendships as a practice is also a long game. If we are fostering it from a person's first day, if we're encouraging those as employees continue through their careers with us, you're building this beautifully interwoven group of people. Even if the friendships change over time because of promotions or transfers, that you're still connected back. You have held a lot of different roles in those last 20 years. What have you done to keep those friendships alive from other roles and organizations and units that you've been in?
I think it's just about it's about the connection, and you just keep those connections, and some of them are more distant than others. You may talk to somebody once every 6 months, but to be able to know who those people are, being able to reach out to them and just even connect on a project, or I got started working on this and it made me think of you, and I think you've done this before. Can you give me some advice? Just having that, just being intentional again about the reach out and keeping that relationship going while it may look and feel different. But I think it's, for me personally, you never forget those people that were so impactful for you throughout your career. And it's important that you stay in touch with them, I think, because you continue to learn from one another.
Yeah, I see that there's an impact on accountability over time as well, because you recognize the interconnection of everyone's goals, and you feel a responsibility and accountability to supporting your friend. You and I worked closely together for a few years, and then within the same organization for several more years after that, but our paths didn't really cross professionally for a big bulk of that time, until I had some responsibility where I gained a new team that provided some support to you. And because of our work friendship, not necessarily because of our real life friendship, but because of the work friendship, I knew what some of your goals were. Things that appeared on the organizational criteria that were big company goals. I felt accountable co-ownership with my work friend because her goals, I know them and I know how they connect to the big picture. So my team's going to do what we can to support you.
I think that's a good example. I think something else that comes to mind a little bit is how you can use as people move in an organization, and how you use that person, lack of a better word, to learn more or to gain a new trust. So-and-so's moved to a department where I maybe haven't had the best relationship before. And then I start to hear a different message from them. And you open up to, okay, let's think about this different, or let's think about these people different and how they go about the work. And it's just a greater understanding of the organization at the same time.
It has me thinking that there is a benefit to spending some time, whether you're in a leadership role or even as a frontline employee, to look across the organization and say, where don't I have relationships?
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean that I'm looking for my new BFF, but where don't I have those relationships? Maybe there have been some misunderstandings. And how can I, not with I'm going to weasel my way in and figure things out, but how can I be strategic about fostering new relationships in the organization
Mm-hmm.
so that I have a better perspective, and that the next time there's a need or a conflict, heaven forbid, that we can get through it faster,
Right.
because we know each other.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. That's, at the end of the day, this is talking about, are the relationships in place that allow you to get the work done? It's not the only reason. It's certainly not the only reason to have friendships at work, to foster them, to go after them actively. It's the big reason that it's so good for us to have friendships.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What are some other simple actions or practices that you think leaders can take to ensure that their employees are able to form friendships with each other?
I think some of it's knowing your team maybe, and what do they need, and do I have a team that they're wildly different in their personalities? How do you foster that? And so I think it comes back to creating the space and the time, and knowing what your team needs to do that. And it may be that you have to be a little more involved in some of the introduction and the wayfinding, if you will, to get folks where they need to be, versus you've got somebody on your team that can help drive all that and using them. But setting up the, whether it's a Teams channel, it's, whatever communication methods you use in your organization, whether it's we'll go old school bulletin board with Post-it notes, right?
Yes.
I mean, there's lots of ways that people can connect.
Mm-hmm.
And I think just being very intentional, and I think also role modeling for your team, what work, those work relationships can look like and how they can benefit.
Mm-hmm.
And not being afraid to speak about that.
I love the idea that being a role model in this space is at the top of the list for people.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, not being shy about it, but showing this is how I function on the job.
Mm-hmm.
I had another random idea too, that I think is an easy, fun practice. If your organization offers any type of like self-assessment, personality assessment, DISC, Enneagram, any of those, or go out online and find one of the thousands of free, simple 5-minute ones, those are a way to do something that's work adjacent, that lets people have a shared language about their preferences, their behaviors, their mindsets, but it gives people a language to talk about who and how they are in their world. And I have found, I think Adobe has one that's Adobe Creative. It's really fun because it gives you this illustrated version of what your creative personality type is. To see if I can find a link to that and share it in the notes. But I saw my team really respond to that type of, we're just going to take this, 25 question assessment with each other and then talk about, what about this made you feel great? What really lined up? Did you learn anything? And it would then become our vernacular.
Right.
And I could see it impacting their relationships as well.
Yeah, I think those things they do because they force you a little bit to put out there maybe pieces of yourself that you wouldn't always share. And they're not your deepest, darkest secrets, but it's the things that help people understand what makes you tick and how you work. And when you really stop and pay attention to those, it can help you understand how to work with others. I have found most helpful sometimes when I struggle with somebody to be like, oh, that's why. Stop doing it that way. Approach them totally different.
Right.
And what a difference it makes,
Yeah.
So absolutely. And I think it does help kind of pull a team together, especially the fun ones
Yeah.
where you can kind of,
Yeah.
have a little fun with it.
I think that is such a good investment of time. And again, obviously there are vetted, assessments that have amazing reputations. But again, even just a free online quiz that lets people talk about who they are. And you said, reveal a little bit of themselves. So those friendships can start to flourish.
Right.
We talked before about friendships at work contributing to psychological safety. I think that we also have to pay attention to psychological safety being part of the terms of people having friendships at work. What do you think are some of the leadership behaviors to connect safety to friendships for their teams?
I think probably one of the biggest is setting the stage, or that it's okay. I, as leader, don't need to know everything. You don't need to come to me as leader for everything. There are things, and you have to have those expectations out for your team. It's okay to use one another to figure things out. As a matter of fact, I want you guys to use one another to sort it out, right? To problem solve, to come up with new ideas, but also to ask the tough questions. And I think about in healthcare especially, and I can only imagine in many industries, but the fear of asking the tough question of someone in a position of leadership or authority, of what that means and those ramifications. So having that person or people and letting your team know it's okay. These people are here to help. This is your team. They're here to help. They're here to guide you.
Yeah.
And it's not going to be about, well, gosh, how did she not know that?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and, a big part of psychological safety is it being safe to not know, as you said, but also to make mistakes. So I think if you discover that a mistake has happened, that maybe somebody went to a friend about and it got back to you, leader, that you're navigating that in a way where there's not finger pointing, where it's a learning opportunity, and that there may be natural consequences depending on the nature of the mistake or error, but there's no punishment associated with it. And that you're very, again, intentional about ensuring that the relationship between those employees involved is not damaged in the resolution of the error.
Yes, I think that's all very important. And there's so much there, because it is about how you as the leader approach that situation, not coming to conclusions and without fact finding, and just having the conversations, and but then how you don't risk somebody's confidence or trust in someone else.
Yeah.
That's tough, but I think it's part of the art of working through those things.
One of the things that each leader needs to do is kind of define the characteristics of a healthy workplace friendship. Trust, boundaries. What are some of the other things that you would add to that?
Gosh, those two are so big. I think, trust is just a huge one. I think it's mutual. I think there has to be, it's a two-way road. Support, encouragement.
Yeah.
I think those are things that just have to be part of it.
I'm also thinking about, we've discussed self-awareness. We've discussed awareness of your employees, and you've talked about kind of knowing your team. I think there's also awareness of the team dynamics and being able to clearly map who has friendships, who is maybe on the outside. Are there cliques that are forming that aren't serving the greater good, if you will? I think I've shared with you, there's a meme that I encountered about a school teacher, and employees are not children. And I think there's something to be learned from this teacher's practice. That every Friday she would ask students to tell her, who do you want to sit with next week? And who's somebody that's doing, that you think has been super cool. I'm really butchering it. Every Friday evening, she would lay all of that information out and look for patterns to see, are there students that are being left out? Are there people that children continually being the ones recognized? If so, why? Do I see that in their behavior and in their academic performance as well. And the person that wrote whatever this post was said that they'd asked the teacher, well, when did you start doing this? And her answer was she started it after Columbine, because that was such a horrible example of missing a dynamic. Well, I don't think we're talking about potentially averting a workplace incident, but you are trying to understand, is someone being left out and not being given the opportunity to fully contribute on the team?
Mm-hmm.
And if so, why?
Mm-hmm.
How do I address that? That's a lot of me sharing thoughts and opinions with you. I'm curious to know how you think that can be operationalized, if you will.
I think it's a lot of observing with the team. I think about teams where, so being in healthcare, you're in a nursing unit and you're making assignments, and is one nurse always given the assignment that's more challenging down in the corner by herself?
Mm-hmm.
You can watch those things, or you watch your team walk into a meeting, and is it always the same two people talking and everybody else, their backs are to them? I think it's just watching and observing and trying to pick up on those things. And then sometimes you're gonna have to dig in a little bit and have some very difficult conversations, but to really understand what's feeding it, what's leading to it, and to figure out how you start to address it.
And hopefully you have friends at work that can help you through that yourself.
Right. And I think that's another place where you maybe use that friend, depending on how close in proximity they are to your work environment of,
Mm-hmm.
I'm seeing some things. You're with my team a lot. Am I overinflating this? Have you noticed anything? Sometimes having an outside opinion, if they're, that trusted friend and they're close enough to your work environment, can be another way to dig in.
Yeah. Well, I immediately had one person pop into my head of, I was having an issue and I couldn't get objective about it because I was in it.
Right.
And found a trusted colleague, a friend at work. This is what I'm experiencing. Am I crazy or not?
Right. Exactly.
Is this me or is this the employee? Because I can't tell.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, one of the benefits is having that person that's going to tell you, really no kidding, it's you, to your point, or really no kidding, you're not the problem here.
Yeah. Right.
So that you have some healthy balance. Well, I am looking at the clock and I want to be very sensitive since it's a weeknight for you. It's a school night, and like to start wrapping our conversation up. And to do that, I would like to ask you, what are one or two kind of big takeaways that you have from our conversation?
I think one big takeaway for me is really connecting the dots between why that question is there, and not to always go back to the survey or to teach to the test or whatever, but why this question is here, and what does it mean for an organization? What does it mean for my department, for my work team? And it's important when you have a team and they're kind of like, well, that question's silly, to talk about, here's what we see across the large group of folks that have done this. And so helping understand that, and then using that to really further conversation with your team. But I think the other thing is that how important it is as a leader to encourage and support the friendships at work. It's not hard. We've talked about some simple things that they don't take long. They don't take a lot of dollars. They're not super hard to do, but just take a little bit of a commitment and ensuring you stick with it. And I think those are probably the two big things.
I agree with you. I think I would add, the thought that comes to mind for me right now is that friendships are so precious. Why wouldn't we want to experience that at the place we spend most of our time?
Yeah, that's a great point.
And as leaders, why wouldn't we want that for our employees as well? Because hopefully as a leader, you're wanting the best experience for your people. And to reiterate, this does not have to take a full-blown 30-page action plan, multi-million-dollar program. This is stuff like, I'm going to bake in 5 minutes on our meeting agenda so that there's definitely time for people to visit. It's those tiny little things that we can do that are going to have a really big impact on people.
Right.
Particularly where we are working in dispersed, remote, and hybrid environments right now, making certain that people feel connected that way is so vital, because that's only going to accelerate.
Oh, yes.
So it's vital that one more intentional place leaders put their attention, not in addition to, but as part of all that work they're doing, is to look at, do I see friendships forming in my team?
Mm-hmm.
And because I'm also an employee, who are my friends?
Correct. Yes. You have to always keep that in mind.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
That's great. Anything else to add, ma'am?
I don't think so.
All right. Thank you again.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to support the podcast, please subscribe, leave a rating or review, or share it with others. You'll find Comfy Chairs updates and other thoughts on leadership and learning on Instagram at 123 Limited. That's ONE23 LTD.